पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ बहुत सारे महाज खुले, कुछ हमने खुद खोले और काफी सारे हमारे खिलाफ खोले गए। आज के महाज
बिग पिक्चर के नाम। बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम, अस्सलाम वालेकुम। मैं हूं वजाहत खान। 2 जुलाई की रात है इधर अमेरिका में, 2 जुलाई की सुबह दोपहर होने वाली है पाकिस्तान और हिंदुस्तान में, और आज बिग पिक्चर का जायजा लेने का वक्त आ गया है। इमरान खान को जेल में अब 697 दिन हो गए हैं, 700 दिन होने वाले हैं। पीटीआई का जो हाल है आपके सामने है। गंडापुर और जुनैद अकबर के दरमियान जो रिफ्ट है, जो दराड़ है, वो और बढ़ती जा रही है। एक तरफ अलीमा खान अपील्स कर रही हैं कि एमपीएज उनका साथ दें, दूसरी तरफ गंडापुर जो है वो अपने ही तरीके से इमरान का जीता हुआ सूबा खुद चला रहा है। इस सब में पीटीआई ने एक बार फिर एक और मुहिम, वन मोर ट्राई, एक धक्का और देने की कोशिश की है, और 3 दिन में जब 10 मुहर्रम हो जाएगी, प्रोटेस्ट शुरू होंगी। उन्हें कौन लीड करेगा, इट्स अनक्लियर। अंदर से, जेल के अंदर से पीटीआई के जो सेकंड टियर ऑफ लीडरशिप है, शाह महमूद, यास्मीन राशिद वगैरह ने साथ मिलके एक ओपन लेटर लिखा है जिसमें मुज़ाकरात की बात की है। क्लियरली पीटीआई के अंदर जब हम घुसते हैं, पाकिस्तान की सियासत के अंदर जब घुसते हैं, हर शहर में, हर सूबे में अलग एक डायनामिक नजर आता है। पंजाब में ये मरीम नवाज के पीछे लगे हुए हैं, और जिधर लगना भी चाहिए क्योंकि उसकी हरकतें ही ऐसी हैं उस शख्स की। बट द बॉटम लाइन इज कि इसे लाहौर की जुबान में ईची बीची कहते हैं। ये बिग पिक्चर नहीं है, ये बहुत छोटी नजर से जब आप देखते हैं, जुनैद अकबर, गंडापुर, मरियम नवाज, अलीमा खान, दिस इज स्मॉल स्टफ, दिस इज नॉट रियली बिग पिक्चर। बिग पिक्चर हम इसलिए कभी कभी जायजा लेते हैं क्योंकि बिग पिक्चर मतलब जो वसी पैमाने पे किसी चीज को नापना, तोलना, समझना, एनालाइज करना, उससे हमें समझ आता है कि लार्जर ट्रेंड्स क्या है। रोज अगर हम इन छोटी छोटी बातों में घुसें तो हमें समझ नहीं आएगी। कल हम इमरान खान साहब की जो नई स्ट्रैटेजी है, जो पंजाब को टारगेट कर रहे हैं, बिल्कुल सही टारगेट कर रहे हैं और करना भी चाहिए, हमने उस पर बात की थी, मगर बिग पिक्चर रह गई थी। आज हम बिग पिक्चर पे नजर डालेंगे, और बड़ा कम होता है कि ऐसे लोग जो बिग पिक्चर पे नजर डालते हैं वो अपने आप के लिए एक्सेस देते हैं। स्पेशली जो बड़े इधर अमेरिका में जो बड़े इन डिमांड एनालिस्ट हैं, जो इन्फ्लुएंस करते हैं वाशिंगटन के थिंक टैंक्स को, वाशिंगटन की पॉलिसी सर्किट को, बेल्टवे को, कैपिटल हिल को, उन से एक्सेस मिले। बड़े अरसे बाद डेरेक ग्रोसमैन से मुझे एक्सेस मिली है। ये एक बड़े इंटरेस्टिंग किस्म के आप कह सकते हैं एनालिस्ट हैं। ये पाकिस्तान दबा के पाकिस्तान की भी क्लास लेते हैं और दबा के हिंदुस्तान की भी क्लास लेते हैं। कल परसों में इन्होंने आर्टिकल लिखा है जिसमें बहुत सारे इंडियंस जो हैं इनसे खुश नहीं हैं। इन्होंने कहा है कि इंडिया और अमेरिका का जो इत्तेहाद है उसमें दरारें पड़ने लग गई हैं, क्रैक्स पड़ने लग गए हैं। एक तो इन्होंने ये लिखा है, मगर साथ साथ एक बहुत कंट्रोवर्शियल ट्वीट भी की है। पाकिस्तान को बहैसियत एक तवाइफ, एक प्रोस्टिट्यूट्स दिखाया है, जिसको यूज करके, जिसके साथ वही सलूक करके जो आई गेस प्रोस्टिट्यूट या तवाइफ के साथ कोई कस्टमर करता है, अमेरिका जो है ड्रेसअप होके आगे जा रहा है। ये तस्वीर उन्होंने चलाई थी जब अमेरिका ने आसिम मुनीर की कंसल्टिंग लेके ईरान पे अटैक कर दिया था। साथ साथ पर्सपेक्टिव भी लिया था आसिम मुनीर का, साथ साथ गोट चीज का गैटो भी खिलाया था, और साथ साथ नोबेल प्राइज की नॉमिनेशन भी ली थी। इस तस्वीर ने, इस ट्वीट ने दीगर पाकिस्तानियों को परेशान किया, इस आर्टिकल ने दीगर हिंदुस्तानियों को परेशान किया। ये एक इक्वल अपॉर्चुनिटी ऑफेंडर हैं, और इक्वल अपॉर्चुनिटी ऑफेंडर जो है कम से कम मेरे लिए सबसे तगड़ा किस्म का एनालिस्ट होता है, क्योंकि वो ये नहीं देखता कि हिंदुस्तानी खुश होंगे या पाकिस्तानी खुश होंगे, वो अपना ही तज्जिया देता रहता है डिपेंडिंग ऑन व्हाट इज एट स्टेक। आज मुझे चांस मिला, रेयर चांस मिला कि मैं डेरेक ग्रोसमैन को कैलिफोर्निया में पकड़ूं और उनसे बात करूं। Okay, so now it's time to pivot to California, where my friend and colleague Derek Grossman, who's a professor at USC and has in fact just launched Indo-Pacific Solutions to think and talk and analyze more about the Indo-Pacific, weighs in. Now, Derek's been in the news, not just because he and I attended the University of Michigan right around the same time, but also because, he's said a couple of controversial things about a couple of controversial situations. Derek, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Great to be back, Waj.
All right. Okay. Great. So let's get things kicked off. Here is I'm going to start with this one first. I love your Twitter feed, man. It's exciting to watch. But you just came out with this story. Now, this is a pretty good take on from my old haunt, Nikkei Asia, where you and I connected. When you were doing exactly this, you were submitting op-eds, and I was editing them, and now I'm analyzing them with you. So I want to do a deep read of this pretty serious claim that cracks have started appearing in the U.S.-India partnership. Now, the piece, if one were to read it together, the piece is interesting. You start with how Modi was the first guest, the first chief guest, the first VVIP to visit the White House back in Feb. Lots of song and dance around him, lots of big hugs. And then soon after, things start breaking down. And just around that time, the deportations of illegal Indian immigrants, shackled, which didn't play out too well in India. Then, of course, the trade tariffs from Trump on Liberation Day and how that deteriorated the situation. And then it gets worse with the Operation Sindoor and the Pahalgam incident, where India and Pakistan fought a tit-for-tat semi-war, pseudo-war, which Trump, at least almost 24 times, has claimed that he's brokered and stopped. Meanwhile, the Indians say no such thing happened. We dealt with the Pakistanis bilaterally. But now Trump is hosting probably India's least favorite person in the region, Asim Munir, for goat cheese gâteau and rack of lamb and jambalaya. So tell me a little more. You say that the Indian-US partnership is still solid, still intact. You say the proof is in the pudding with a new trade deal that's just been inked, and we're going to talk about the trade deal in a minute. But how do you think this has all happened so fast? Is the X factor Donald Trump himself, or have the Pakistanis, as some people assess, sort of outmaneuvered the good old South Bloc bureaucrats and babus who were thinking that they would deal with Trump like they did back in the day when there was that Howdy Modi event in Houston, when Trump and Modi were giving each other hugs on grand stages in Texas. And they thought, South Bloc thought, oh, we've dealt with this man before. We know how to deal with him. But he's clearly a different man, and this is clearly a different administration.
Yeah, no, I think you laid out my case fairly well in terms of how U.S.-India ties, although resilient, I think have kind of changed their tone and tenor in the last few months since Modi's visit. And I think a lot of it is due to the fact that Trump is just, as we've been talking about for years now, is a highly unpredictable and transactional leader. And I think he saw opportunity and continues to see opportunity in dealing with Pakistan. One of the things that I didn't really highlight in the piece that maybe I should have explored more is his interest in cryptocurrency when it comes to Pakistan in particular, right? And I also think that the foreign policy, to your point about, has India maybe misread Trump in his second administration? I think there's something to that as well, because in the first administration, he was really surrounded by, I would say, old school Republicans who wanted to steer the American, ship of state in a very kind of conventional way on the world stage. But now you have folks around him who are much less of the primacist type or the hegemonic type, if you will, to maintain American dominance across the world. And now they are more of the prioritizer type, right, who seek to kind of do less in the region, right, or any region, right, around the world, to have others do more. And we can't ignore the fact that the U.S. was planning to strike nuclear targets in Iran, and Pakistan is right next door to Iran. So that Asa Munir meeting happened just before, right, the U.S. launched Operation Midnight Hammer. So Trump is kind of thinking very like transactionally about all of the relationships that can help the U.S. accomplish its interests first, rather than kind of favoring one country over another, like India over Pakistan, for example.
So last week, I had our common friend Mike Kugelman in the same seat, sort of talking about this similar subject, because it's been simmering. The Indian shine has sort of worn off in the Western Hemisphere. Some capitals, like in Ottawa, the Canadians don't like the Indians, well, because the Indians are killing people in Canada. End of story. Even in the last days of the Biden administration, there was a nice little polite cover-up of the attempted murder right here in New York City by Indian security forces, allegedly. And there's an ongoing investigation going on right now as we speak. But besides that, the dual, I guess you can say, the dual face about Russia versus Ukraine, that's really ticked off a lot of Western capitals and diplomats as well. So the India's sheen has worn off. But Mike had another point, and he calls it, and I like the way he talked about it. He called it the 4 C's, which Pakistan and Trump seem to be converging on. Counterterrorism, which is an old one. Crypto, which is a new one, when you mentioned. Critical minerals, which is another new one, which the Pakistanis are sort of giving the Americans first dips for. They're giving them shotgun access to those new projects in Balochistan and the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. And then, of course, China, where Pakistan is an interesting bridge and always has been, if you go back and look at diplomatic history between Beijing and Washington. But I would say that there's a new one, which you just talked about, consulting. Pakistan's interestingly playing a local consulting game. Asim Munir was sort of the local consultant in chief for a quick minute, for a couple of hours over lunch. And that's what Trump alluded to. He said, yeah, I was impressed by the general. He also said, yeah, they know Pakistan better than most. And he also said they're not happy. Now, he didn't really give a damn that Pakistan was happy or not. He went ahead with Midnight Hammer anyways. But he did listen to the Pakistanis. They got a seat on the table. They weighed in. That is rare. That is rare access. It's also a rare position. So again, I come back to the logic question. Have the Pakistanis outmaneuvered the Indians? It just seems like in the post-conflict month or two that we've had, it seems to be the case, especially with Trump claiming again and again that it was his ceasefire. In fact, he got a nomination out of it by the Pakistanis for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah. It's hard to say, whether Pakistan is really outmaneuvered. It's more kind of like, Trump is saying things that Pakistan is agreeing with after the fact to kind of support Trump and win Trump's favor, right? And that's so you could argue that's outmaneuvering, right? But at the same time, from my perspective, India at the same time is not really. I mean, they have their narrative; they're sticking to it, right? So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I would say let that rest. But it just seems your claim is that things are pretty solid, fundamentally solid with India, but you do agree with me that there may be some outmaneuvering here from the Pakistanis. Especially, I just feel like they know Trump 2.0 better than the Indians know Trump 2.0. That's my contention. But speaking of contentions, this was also published recently on your very active Twitter feed. Yeah. And this got around, wow, what are the numbers on this? Around 1.8 million views, 3.7 thousand retweets, 16,000 likes, over 1,000 comments. This is a very, very controversial cartoon. And it came with a pretty controversial comment by you. Pakistan hates being used by the US. Looks like it just happened again. Now, you tweeted this on June 23rd, which was soon after that lunch and after the beginning of Operation Midnight Hammer, when the Pakistanis for a minute, looked pretty flummoxed. They just dined with the president and gone back home and nominated him for the Nobel. And then, boom, he hits the other Islamic Republic in the region, their brother, Iran. Is that the context of this cartoon, or is there more to it? Because there was a lot behind this very, very loaded image.
Yeah, I mean, Pakistan has always thought that the US is trying to use it for its own purposes, right? I remember, many years ago when I took a course on South Asia politics, that the professor pointed out that Pakistan doesn't want to be used as a condom, for the US that you use and you throw away. Right. And so this is just, I think, another example with Asim Munir coming to the United States, sitting down for lunch with Trump, talking for 2 hours plus, and then Trump coming out later and saying that Pakistan really understands Iran more than most, and we're going to support Iran, and then conducting Operation Midnight Hammer, right? So, which I think is very contrary to Pakistan's interests, because they want to have stability in the region. They want to have Pakistan has done a lot of work in terms of having a better relationship with Iran. Don't forget that India is trying to use Iran to box Pakistan in geostrategically, right? So there's a lot of reasons why I think Pakistan would not want the US to do what it did, right? And yet the US sits down with, via Trump and Munir, has a great meeting. He comes out later, Trump, and says, I love Pakistan, right? And then continues to go ahead and do something that is against Islamabad's interests. So for me, like, that cartoon can go way back in the day, right? And is it offensive? Is it insulting? It probably is to people, right? But at the same time, there's a nugget of truth to that political cartoon, right? Which is that from Pakistan's view, it looks at what the US is doing as basically using Pakistan and not protecting its interests, only protecting its own interests. And that's why I think it's important to kind of make sure everybody understands that is what the US is doing in this moment. And it's not something that yours truly approves of.
Right. So for the days around Operation Midnight Hammer, where there was that lunch, which was clearly not a very free lunch at all for Asim Munir, because he returned, nominated Trump, and boom, then had to deal with the flack. The whole Pakistani establishment had to deal with the flack of their neighbor being bombed. And then, of course, there's been a post-Midnight Hammer narrative, which is also being fueled, that after Iran, Pakistan is next. Some actors out of Israel are saying it. Some actors out of India are saying it. In fact, the Israeli ambassador to India has just spoken to a conclave in India, saying that Pakistan and North Korea are the only two proliferator of weapons in the free world at this point, and out of all the countries in the nuclear club. So Pakistan is definitely paying for the aftermath of Midnight Hammer. But some would argue, Derek, that actually it's the Pakistanis who are also playing ball this time with Trump. Again, we bring it back to the crypto diplomacy, which is allowed them to jimmy open a back door into the Trump White House because of Witkoff and his son and Trump's sons, who are all involved in this crypto company. The critical minerals bit, which Trump wants. And just last week, the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad hosted a conference call with American mining associations and American investors about with Pakistani mining companies. There's big bucks here. In fact, there's reports that the Pakistanis might be cutting a $1.3 trillion deal for those minerals with the U.S. And these are good sources sort of chiming in. So it seems that the Pakistanis are actually in a good place, where after nothing in the Biden administration, almost nothing in the first Trump administration, clearly nothing but Osama bin Laden and a drone war in the Obama administration, there hasn't been such camaraderie and access to the White House since the George W. Bush administration. The Pakistanis have sort of rolled back time almost 2 decades. So one can argue that your cartoon is not reflective of the modern achievements of the modern Pakistani diplomatic machinery.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that you could argue that, but keep in mind that you correct me if I'm wrong, right? As Pakistani, right? That the perception is that the U.S. uses and loses Pakistan. And that has been something that has been consistent throughout the decades, right? And that is why Pakistan has had to turn to the likes of China. I don't think Pakistan wants to have a better relationship with China than the United States, but they have to, because the United States is fundamentally untrustworthy and not a credible partner longer term, especially when interests in counterterrorism wane. Now, yes, there are crypto, there's critical minerals, as you pointed out. These are kind of new things, and we'll see where they go, right? But really, the last 2 decades plus is all been for the U.S. has been all about India, right, and having a stronger India partnership. And so, to me, I feel like Pakistan, that sentiment in Pakistan is still remains, even if Pakistan has been outmaneuvering the Indians on the messaging, post Operation Sindoor.
Yeah, moot point. We agree. Of course we do. We're Wolverines. What else do you expect? Okay, this is big, man. This is big. I know it's on your radar because it's on your Twitter, but I've done a couple of stories on it, and I need you to weigh in. Now, it's still early days, but China and Pakistan and a couple other countries in the region, Bangladesh, for example, have been talking on the sidelines of expos. There's a South Asian China Expo, which just wrapped up. The 8th version of that wrapped up. There's talk of replacing SARC. What is SARC? SARC is dead in the water. It's the regional association for South Asia, dominated by the India-Pakistan dyad, which is, well, because they're so obsessed with each other. The other countries, Afghanistan, the Maldives, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, they're chopped liver. They haven't been connected because of the India-Pakistan rivalry, and now China sees a advantage. China sees that it doesn't need India to make inroads into South Asia, and especially Bangladesh and Pakistan, which are talking again, have been engaged by the Chinese. Now, this is interesting because the Chinese are coming in a big way in Pakistan. We've talked about that a bunch of times. We don't need to get back into that, but they're also coming in a big way into Bangladesh. They're exploring over $1 billion of investments with the Teesta River project. There's other BRI investments in Bangladesh, and now we have a friendly to Pakistan government in Bangladesh, which is rare. And all of them, the Bangladeshis, the Pakistanis, the Chinese, are meeting in China to talk about regional cooperation. Is India being routed out by China in South Asia?
Well, I think China would argue that India has routed itself out, right? But yeah, I mean, from the Indian perspective, what is China doing in this region, right? China is not a resident of South Asia. And the only way the Indians can view it, and I think the US would view it similarly, is that the Chinese are trying to make additional inroads into South Asia by partnering with countries that are not friendly to India, right? I mean, Pakistan, of course, but also Bangladesh increasingly so since the transition in their government back in August of last year, right? And they're inviting other countries in, like Sri Lanka and Maldives, for example, right? Now, these countries have good relations with India, but they also, I think, have an appetite for some regionalism, right? Some additional engagement that they're not getting because, as you mentioned, SARC has been dead, at least since 2015, right? Last time they met. And so, yeah, I think China can just bill this as it's China having trilateral, multilateral engagements with other countries, something that they've always done and they'll continue to do, and they have every right to do. But from the Indian and American perspectives, it's going to be China's trying to leverage Belt and Road Initiative, this massive global infrastructure and investment program to try to curry additional favor with these countries to get them to do their bidding, to get them to do China's bidding within the region in the future. And that is, I think, very problematic, for India and the US, if that is in fact the case. But if you take China at its word, I never do, right? But if you take China at its word, it's all about just normal kind of state-to-state relations. I mean, they just had, to go to another region in the Indo-Pacific a few weeks ago, they just had the first ever China-Pacific Islands Forum held in China, right? And so, China's not a member of the Pacific Islands Forum, okay, but they do have a relationship with Pacific Island countries bilaterally that in the aggregate, they've created into a multilateral dialogue. They have the China-Africa Forum on cooperation, right? So 54 countries in Africa, one recognizes Taiwan over China, the other 53 recognize China. They meet with them multilaterally, at least, well, they're supposed to once a year.
But look at the vacuum the Indians have created. To your point about how India has sort of routed itself out. Um, Obviously, the India-Pakistan rivalry. We don't have enough time for that. But then in the post-Hasina exit, India has doubled down on defending Hasina, and then of course new pro-Chinese government in Sri Lanka, an anti-Indian government in the Maldives. In fact, even in Nepal, there's meanderings and musterings of pro-Chinese voices. Even though Nepal's been very nicely aligned with India for years, for decades. So India, because of the whole, and some people put this on S. Jaishankar's South Bloc, his MEA, he's got a chip on his shoulder. I like the guy. I've read his books. I think it's good that India has a career diplomat, but he's rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, both in Western capitals as well as regional capitals. And isn't this a little bit of, some call his India first, the India alone policy as critique of how India's arrogance is, sometimes a little too visceral and visible to people who interact with South Bloc's diplomats these days. What do you think has happened? Has India really ticked off its neighbors and now they're sort of like going to China because of the goodies that China can offer them and the larger drawing room where they can chill out with the Chinese?
Yeah, well, I think in the case of Bangladesh, that's certainly true, that the Indians have ticked them off, especially with Hasina, right, and not extraditing her back to Dhaka to face, criminal proceedings. But I think, it's less clear with Sri Lanka and Maldives and Nepal. I think they've always kind of steered this middle course, right? They've always tried to prioritize India as the regional dominant power, right? But they also don't want to get too dependent on India. And of course, China's always knocking at their door. So there's opportunity there, right? So I think it's that they are, steering this middle course, and that there isn't really, I've always said it isn't really like pro-India or pro-China or anti-India or anti-China. It's more like India friendly or China friendly, right? But leaving the door open to have multiple friends, right? If it comes to that, and they have done that.
All right, real quickly, let's wrap this up. Now, this is important because you predicted it, and it's happened, and it just happened this morning. The terms agreed and locked. India-U.S. trade deal announcement likely before July the 8th. Now, this was predicated going back to your piece. These two guys might not be getting along, but they have managed to cut a trade deal. Tell us about the importance of this trade deal. This was the underpinning of your last piece, that the relationship is solid enough. The Indians were pretty muted and measured and restrained in their counter-tariff responses. And here we are. But there is a sticking point here. Trump keeps on saying that, it was my carrot and stick. I can't do a Trump impression. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Trump says it was my trade carrot and stick, which did it with the Indians, much to their chagrin. They hate the fact that Trump is connecting trade with Sindoor and the ceasefire. But is he gonna say something again on July 8th, saying I got this deal because I managed the ceasefire? Is that expected? What's going to happen there? And what's the deal about?
Yeah, I mean, he keeps saying that the way he and basically he alone was able to facilitate this ceasefire, right, by leveraging trade. And the Indians have said, no, it's not true. In fact, Jaishankar just said a few hours ago that, I was in the room, okay, when the conversation happened. There was no mention of trade, right? Now, it's not that we have to take, or we should take Jaishankar's word as gospel, because it isn't necessarily, right? But I mean, it is highly odd, right, that India would agree to something based on trade, right? Because it's like apples and oranges. I mean, it should not factor in to security calculations to forge a new trade deal, right? I think when Modi came to the White House in February, the goal was to try to, I mean, preferably when Trump would announce trade tariffs, to have no tariffs on India, right? But to much to India's, I guess, frustration, there weren't just tariffs at that universal 10%, but there were also additional reciprocal tariffs that were put on India. So they were at 26%, right? So I do think that the 26% was very insulting to them and frustrating, but at the same time, they were already thinking we need to forge a trade deal to ensure that we have a less bumpier time with Trump than we would have. Notice I say less bumpier. It's always going to be bumpy, right? There's no smooth sailing here, okay? But maybe we can blunt it, right? If we were to agree to this trade deal. So that's why I think, in the piece I point out that yes, there are rumblings on the Indian side about how Trump is mistreating India, but at the same time, they've been patient, they've been sort of resilient, and they've been quiet about it, right? Modi in his phone call with Trump said it had nothing to do with trade, like, stop saying that, but that was a phone call that was really supposed to be between two leaders, right? And it's not, they haven't really made a big deal about it publicly until today, actually, with Jai Shankar. Maybe it's coincidental because the trade deal is now locked in, as you say, that they can kind of, throw mud at it, I guess. But they've been pretty even just quiet and patient about it.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to how they want to preserve this U.S.-India strategic partnership going forward.
Yeah, and I'm wondering last bit whether we're going to be getting Indian iPhones in these great United States, because Trump doesn't want them. He told Tim Cook, no iPhones from India. No, no, no. All right, Derek Grossman from California. You're a professor at USC. You've just founded the Indo-Pacific Solutions. I guess you can call it like a consulting firm. That's what
it is, doing. Yeah.
And I'm excited about your new venture, formerly at RAND. And thank you for writing this wonderful piece and for all this time this morning. I hope we can do this again. Thanks, Derek.
We will. Thanks, mate. Take care. See you.
All right, take it easy. That was Derek Grossman from California weighing in. This space for analysis in the Indo-Pacific, specifically in India and Pakistan, has really reduced. There's not a lot of people who are doing it. And we're hopefully, as you can see from this show, trying to get people who still watch the region with a close eye on the same page, and hopefully on a regular basis, so that you can be better informed about your choices and understanding of this huge, this important, this very populous region called South Asia. Thank you for watching my show. Share, like, subscribe, comment, support independent journalism, support independence, and do check out my membership options. I'll talk to you very soon. Pakistan, Zindabad.